we're going to start right at the very
Namaste.
beginning.
It's very loud. Thank you.
Nicolas is going to walk us through these slides, particularly this one. Nicolas, you had
yes.
something to say about this.
Actually, many people ask me when I started to make comics book and when I wanted to make that job and tell stories with pictures. So I decided to show this first slide. It's actually my first comics book, and I made it when I was 7 years old, and it hasn't been published yet. But I don't think the plot is rich enough.
Nicolas, I think
Okay, another microphone. Yep. Can you hear me? I don't hear you. Okay, thank you. So on this comics book, that's the story of my teddy bear I had when I was a kid. And he's traveling through the world to come to Europe, basically. So that was, I did that 30 years ago.
Wow.
Doesn't make us young.
That's a while ago.
Thank you.
Yeah. Here in India, we've published Nicolas in translation. We've published Kabul Disco 1 and the sequel to it. They're both available at the HarperCollins stall here. Nicolas, do you want to tell us a little bit about your work in French? I mean, we are familiar with Kabul Disco here. It's done very well for us. But would you tell us a little more about your work, in the original in French?
Actually, in France, sorry, I do like freelance illustration. So I do illustration for magazine, for websites, and also I do comics book. Right. So, well, you know Kabul Disco, but I did one other comics book about that takes place in Iran, and I think it will be published here too soon.
Yes, the Iran comic will be out in India in 2015.
Oh, that's very soon.
Yes,
what good
that's
news.
soon.
And so, and besides that, I travel a lot. I spend a lot of time in Dubai, for instance. Recently, I went to Argentina, Turkey. I went to a book fair in Turkey. So I'm very lucky. And every time I travel, I take some notes, and sometimes I find something to work on. And I open my eyes, my ears everywhere, and I try to find topics or news stories. I think in every country, or even in your home place, there are stories that just wait to be told. So whenever you travel, I have a sketchbook and I draw and take notes.
You're actually trained in art, Nicolas. We just heard the introduction about the workshops you've been to and that sort of thing. I think there are a lot of aspiring comic novelists and artists here. If you could tell us a little bit about, training in art and the process of it, that would be great.
Yes, why not? A good question, thank you. Actually, I was studying in France in an art school in Strasbourg. And in French art schools, there is you can learn comics book and graphic novels. It's a part of the cursus. So I took 3 years of illustration classes, and what they teach you is more how to draw for narration, how to tell a story with images. So that will be comics book, but also movie animation, storyboard for cinema.
Right.
That's one family of that specific kind of art. They wouldn't teach you how to draw. That's the graphic way you draw is your own personality. That comes from you. But how to use your drawings to tell a story, that's something you can learn, because there's lots of tricks. You know how to build a narration, how to make characters, how to make a plot and suspense. And
right.
even when you make documentaire or reportage comics, you need to work on the storyline. You have to choose which idea you put inside and how to build a cliffhanger, for instance, and all those things. And in France, comics book is very popular, so a lot of people draw some, and a lot of people read them, so it's almost a normal job nowadays.
Right. Would you say that, tell us a little bit about the comic scene in France. What sort of, a lot of us here in India came to comics from, the superhero genre, that kind of thing. And a lot of, I mean, we still read it, I'm sure, but we do read all other kinds of comics, and there's that sort of growing in India.
Actually, in France, we don't really have superhero comics.
At all, right.
I think that's really American in the first place because
Right.
it's a new country, so it's a country we need a mythology. So a lot of people are building a mythology for America,
Right.
and I think superheroes or
Right.
Star Wars is like modern mythology for.
Right.
But France is old country.
Well, we turned our mythology into comic art as well in Amar Chitrakatha.
Yeah, in India, you mean?
Amar Chitrakatha, have you seen those?
Which one? Yes, indeed. Yeah, in India, some gods are superheroes. I saw like the old from the 70s, the leaflets about mythology,
Right.
and you see like a Vishnu like fighting against
Yeah.
the enemies.
Yeah.
And
No, but so what are comics in France like?
the most famous you would know is Tintin, which is actually from Belgium, and Asterix with like the French hero, because he's very moody and
That's right.
he's resisting against Rome. But actually, every comics book artist is like trying has his own writing, his own way of drawing. So you don't really have. But at the time of Tintin, you have La Ligne Claire, like the Belgian school, where everybody will draw a certain way with a pure line and some solid colors. But nowadays, it goes in every direction.
Okay.
Since the 90s, you had the new writers from L'Association, for instance, who started graphic novels.
Right.
So graphic novels is more for like adult audience. So there's
Right.
topics like people taking their life or about society, the war, historical topics.
Right.
And now in France, the big wave is to make reportage in comics, like
Okay.
comics reportage. So you have comics in the newspaper, like some journalists would go, for instance, in Syria and report in comics book about the war. And there is even a newspaper called La Revue Dessinée, the drawn newspaper, and it's a magazine 100% made out of comics book, and it's available every 3 months, and you have like maybe 50 pages of just comics book, and they talk about everything about all the topics you will treat in a newspaper.
Right.
So that's pretty big nowadays in France.
Well, how many people here are familiar with Kabul Disco?
Yep, he's here.
A few people. That's not bad. But you know, would you like to tell us a little bit about the backstory of Kabul Disco and how? I mean,
yeah.
they're two of my favorite comics, you know, and we're very, very proud to have published them. But
So-
would you tell us a little bit about the backstory of it, you know, and how you came to it? And
Actually, it's quite random. You know, sometimes you have accidents in life that take you in some direction randomly. So I ended up in Afghanistan randomly, or not that randomly. I was looking for a job. I didn't have a place to stay in France, no money, so I find a job in Kabul and I took it. I thought, oof, finally, I both find a place to stay and something to do, and then I'm traveling all together. So I thought it was a great opportunity. So I was doing comics book actually in Afghanistan, but it was to communicate like to the Afghan who don't know how to read, or children about everything, about human rights, about the election, about the danger of opium. So we worked with NGOs or the government to make like communication campaign in comics book. So it was a very specific work, and it was very interesting because through that I learned a lot about the politics, about opium, about the election, about all those topics, about the army. And after 2 years doing that work, I really knew the geopolitical scene in Afghanistan. And since then I keep informing myself, and I read a lot about Afghanistan. And I also went to Iran, India. I never went to Pakistan. It's on my to-go list, but we'll see what happens.
So, you know, in Kabul Disco, at least the way I see it, and correct me if I'm wrong, Nicolas, but the way I see it, Nicolas, you know, he contains his story within the cocoon of the expat life there, which is a very clever device because, you know, it throws into relief the world outside, because the world inside is like so claustrophobic and so kind of You know, it's a cocoon. In Kabul, the expat
Yes, actually,
life where like
you
these
couldn't
smaller
really
dramas are playing out.
choose the way you want to live. Like in India or anywhere else, when you're a foreigner, you can do whatever you want. You can walk freely in the streets. But
Right.
in Kabul, we had some very tight
Right.
security rules.
Right.
So sometimes when the security is very bad, we have to stay in the house, and it's very claustrophobic. So I wanted to give that feeling of claustrophobia through the books.
Yeah.
And sometimes the danger are outside, and you don't really know what happens. It's very bizarre.
Yeah.
But sometimes, although we had chance to travel through the country, I went to Herat, Bamiyan, Mazar-e-Sharif, and when I have a chance, I put some like description of the country. But indeed, it's not a real journalist work about Afghanistan. It's very inside story, and I wanted to tell about a mood, a specific time, in a specific community. And writing about yourself is easier than writing about other people because the model you use is you, so you can go back and forth with yourself. The next book I made was the story of somebody else, and for that I did a lot of research. I was interviewing people who knew the person, so it's another approach. But when I started Kabul Disco, I had a blog, and usually when you blog, you speak about yourself, your own stories. It's very a personal thing.
Right.
So the blog became a book.
Right.
Yeah.
So is, by and large, this sort of travelogue, that kind of comic, going to be the Nicolas Wild comic? Like, is that?
Yes. and people said in a Comic Con you have to wear a cosplay. You have to pick up a character from a comics book and dress like him. So I decided to dress like myself. So this is my. Thank you.
He features prominently in
Yeah, well,
all
that's the
books.
short I was wearing in Afghanistan.
Oh.
I never washed it since then. Oh, the necklace, yes. Because my last book is about Zoroastrianism in Iran, so I'm wearing a falavar here. It's a symbol of Zoroastrianism, amongst other things. So that's another part of my cosplay.
Yeah. Starting point for us to talk about, you know, the non-fiction comic,
Yes.
which is sort of really growing quite strongly as a genre. You know, since you've been doing non-fiction comics for a while now. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about the global trend. You know, the sort of larger narrative to it.
Like, how did it start? Or, well, actually, I think every story is true. When you tell a story, the story itself has its truth. So whether you make it up out of nothing or you tell a real a story that really happened, the result will be some kind of true story. There's no fake story.
Right.
And the reason why I draw about my own experience is because I happen to live very interesting things. Like in Afghanistan, it was quite unique, all the people I've met, the situation. But if sometimes when you travel, nothing happened to you, so it's not an obligation to write about it.
Right.
Now, I think I will go back to fiction, maybe in a couple of years. I'm finishing 2 other non-fiction projects, but there are some limits as well, because when you write about reality, you cannot really change the reality too much. You can do it a little bit, but if people notice you are cheating, they wouldn't follow you. They will go like, oh. So, and sometimes when I write from reality, I want to go in direction, like to take my character somewhere else, to make them die, but you can't.
Right.
So it's very frustrating sometimes.
Right.
But
So that's sort of you see your role as somewhere between a storyteller and a journalist. Then.
that's in India here.
So-
That's drawings from India.
Oh, these are drawings from India, Nicolas says.
Yeah. Sorry.
Is there a story to them?
No.
No.
I drew a rickshaw. But there's many stories with rickshaw, but
Right.
no story.
But you know, if we have questions from the audience, we can kind of continue the conversation around those questions as well.
There's
a
somebody's
question.
waving.
We're going to get you a mic there.
Sure.
Can you understand when I speak, by the way? Yeah?
Can I have a couple of volunteers handling the mics, ma'am?
Hi, Nicola. A big fan. Have read both the novels there. So I just want to ask, you had a day job at that NGO, right? You were doing comics for the elections there. So how did you balance your personal work versus the work you were doing? Did you draw every night? How long did it take to complete the book?
Actually, the work I did in Afghanistan, I was working in an office, so I wake up at 9, go to the office, do the work. And after, on the weekend, I was doing some small sketches or some small pages of comics for my blog. But I would do it like twice a month, maybe. And I didn't really have much time in Afghanistan to work on my comic. So I was more gathering notes and making some little sequences. And once I go back to France in 2007, I print everything I wrote from the blog, from my sketchbooks, and I put it on the floor. And I try to find, try to stick the pieces of puzzle together to build a story, to have a global storyline. So which character I should put in, which topic, and that work never really stopped. I start doing it. Then once I had a basic idea of the story, I would do the end first, like the last sequence, which would be the last sequence of book 2. And then I start from the beginning again. So once you have the end of the story in mind, you know where you go and you don't get lost. And you can give little hints of what will happen in the futures. So it ties the story together. And sometimes when I have pages, so I don't work chronologically, I go, if there's one sequence I want to work, I go for it. And at the end, there's all the things I don't want to do. And sometimes I remove sequences, sometimes I add some. So before the end, I keep editing the story. So my publisher was not very happy because they want to have a whole storyboard finished, and then all the pages in the order, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But I think I have more like a cinematic spirit. Like I am editing like you edit a movie, you know. If you see one sequence is too long, you chop a couple of frames, or you redraw, or if it's too short, you can enlarge them. So I work on the rhythm of the story at the end, and I try to see, I print a lot of copies and I give it to my friends, or even to people I don't know best, and I wait for their feedbacks. Like I ask them question, when did you, if you read the books in one time, which is very good, it means you have a page turner. But when people stop reading a book, I ask them which part did they stop, and if everybody stop at the same time, there's a problem with the narration. So I keep working back and forth with the feedbacks. And blogging is very good to have also early feedbacks. With sometimes you have an idea, you put it on your blog, you see the reaction, people don't understand, they love it. It's very helpful.
And how long did this take, like the entire book to finish? Like what duration?
Actually, first book took me 1 year, and the second book took me another year. So from 2007 to 2008, that's the 2 years I took to finish the 2 books.
Okay.
And there will be a third one, but I am very, very late. It was due for 2009. But actually I changed, I will do a third book, but it will be different. It will be somebody else's story, because about my own life in Afghanistan, I haven't much else to say. So I finally find a new topic, very exciting, and ta-da.
Okay, just one last question. Since
Sure.
you're in such a sensitive place, geopolitically, did you have to censor some part out that you thought would be interesting, but you kind of faced opposition that this is too sensitive to bring out in a comic book?
I didn't understand the question. Not really. Especially when I was working on the first book, nobody knew me, so it was, when you do a first book, you can do whatever you want. You don't really think you will have an audience, or you cannot think you will be translated in English for India. It's like, but now I am more careful. Well, I try to avoid hurting people for no reasons. But if there is specific topics I want to speak about, usually I allow myself. It's a good question. Sometimes you are self-censoring yourself, you don't even know it. But I don't put nudity in my books, for instance, because I know my mother reads them. And there's no free violence. What else? Although there's lots of sensitive topics like religion, you have to find a way to make fun of religion without offending people, because you could die. So you have to be careful with that. But I don't think I offend anyone yet.
Are there any other questions? We have a question here in the front row.
Yeah, hi Nicolas.
Hello.
I love your works. Just see your images on India.
Yeah.
So, is there a Mumbai disco in the cards or something like this? You can stay here for 1 year or do something like that.
Actually, I've been in India 6 times already, and I came 6 months from 2003, 2004, and I wrote a lot back then. But I never could publish what I did because nobody knew who I was. But now my publisher, I'm rewriting what I wrote back then, and it's more like a travel. There was no blog in 2003, so it's more like an intimate story about me being in India. And I did have the chance to be in Bombay in 2003, so I did write about Bombay, and maybe I will add a last chapter about this trip, like 10 years later, sort of. And it was very different. It was not a comics book I did, it was like text and drawings. So the drawing you see, like for instance, I will sit somewhere, draw people, and then on the side write about the people I draw. It's another kind of narration. It's not like in Kabul Disco, it's more like a comedy. You have many characters talking to each another. You have me, myself as a character, but other people as well, and everybody have a different position about the story. And yes, so that book about India should be published in France next year. And after, I don't know if it will be translated in English for India. We'll see.
Any other questions? So, Nicolas, while we're waiting for another question, I wanted to ask you, Kabul's a grim place in many ways, but Kabul Disco is full of wit. I mean, there are laugh out loud parts of it. It's a wonderful way to tackle some very, very serious issues. What do you have to say about this?
Actually, once you live in Kabul, you don't think of it as a dangerous place because you live in there. So when you are abroad, you always hear about Kabul when something bad happens. So you always have a collection of bad stories, tragedy. But once you're in the place, bad thing happen, but it will be like once in a while. And also, all the books I've read about Afghanistan were very depressing. And I wanted to show something different. And Afghan people have a great sense of humor. They do. They don't have any choice sometimes. Maybe it's a dark sense of humor, but and we had a lot of fun with my colleagues, with my Afghan colleagues, my expat friends, and sometimes when you are in a situation, in a war-torn country situation, all the stress you leave it abroad. Your brain, all the stressful information you put it on the side of your brain. And it's once you go back to France or India or wherever, all the stress comes to you again. So people start having a nervous breakdown after Afghanistan. Sometimes. I saw some people going completely paranoid in Afghanistan itself, but the worst story I heard was about the people who start having a post-traumatic syndrome back in their homeland, especially the people working in the army or some war journalists. We were very lucky in a way because living in Kabul as a civilian, it was okay. It was not that terrible. And also, yeah, when you can have people laugh about such a topic, you will interest them in a different way. Some people said, "Oh, a book about Afghanistan? No, no, please, I don't want that." But say, it's a funny one. Say, okay, I give it a try. So when they are laughing, can give them information about the country, about the politics, about everything that they will receive without knowing it, sort of. I think when you laugh, you are more, you give more attention to the story, sort of.
Right. Do we have any more questions? There's another question there.
Hello, once again, sir. I just had a question. You have presented some really bold ideas in all of your graphic novels, and I just wanted to ask that did you face some sort of controversy, or did your graphic novels become a source of controversy in the places which you wrote about them?
You mean in Afghanistan or?
Yeah, Afghanistan and Kabul. Yeah.
Actually, there was a slide before. The book was sold in Kabul, the Indian version, and the book went through the Ministry of Culture, and the minister saw the cover of the book and said, "No, that's not possible." I think that was the slide later on. And Harper did another cover for Afghanistan, because I think that will be next slide. You see on the left, the Afghan said, yeah, here. Can we stop on here? Okay. So that's the first version. And at first in Afghanistan, they put some paint on the cover because they said that a foreigner who dances with an Afghan woman is not polite. You cannot dance with an Afghan woman unless she's a prostitute. And they said you couldn't allow to draw a prostitute on a book in Afghanistan. And after they added it was dangerous to dance on a cannon, on a tank. So finally, we changed the cover. That one is for the Afghan edition. I agreed to change the cover because the cover doesn't say much about the book itself, and inside the book, nothing has changed. Nothing has been. Maybe they didn't open it at the ministry. I don't know. But that was the only situation of small controversy.
My question is that when you write comics, does something spark your interest? Like, is it something random, or do you take inspiration from certain things?
Yes. Actually, inspiration is something you don't really know where it comes from. Sometimes you wake up with an idea and say, "Oh, I have an idea." Sometimes you don't. Actually, most of the time you don't. But when you do find a good idea, stick to it and dig it. So how to recognize a good idea is a good question. I have no idea. You have to trust yourself, and if you write something that you will like for yourself, usually it's good, because for myself I have common taste. I like a lot of things. I like Star Wars. I like to read Nietzsche or whatever. And I write and draw first for myself to make love myself, sort of. So after I show what I do to other people through blogs. If it works, it's good. If they like it as well, it's good. If it doesn't work, maybe they are wrong, or maybe you are wrong. Sometimes you have good ideas that happen to be completely stupid for no reason. In the opposite, sometimes I write some ideas, I let down, like, oh, I don't believe in it. And years after, I read them, I say, oh wow, this is very nice. So you never really know, so that you have to try your chance. But once you start publishing your book and you know what kind of audience you have a better idea about what you are worth, like. But when you are starting as a young writer, it's very difficult to know indeed if your ideas are good or not. Some people have good ideas nobody understands, or only after their death, which is a bit sad. Or sometimes the ideas are bad, but the way of selling them is good. So you can make a stupid book and you can sell it very well if you have a good advertisement, a good Facebook page, or if you build a narrative outside the book to sell the book, which happens more and more nowadays. Here we go.
You know, I came across this little web comic that you did. I came across this little webcomic that you did set in Nepal recently. And, you know, as I was reading it, I was thinking that, you know, how does he do this? Does he meet someone and then quickly go, you know, behind some little cover and sketch them out quickly, get that expression just right and come away?
Yeah.
Because you met a lot of people there, right? And you sketched a lot of people there and that sort.
Actually, yes, I was commissioned by a French channel, Arte, who's doing a B-Media. They did a big reportage about refugee camps. They did 4 refugee camps, one in Nepal, one in Iraq, one in Africa, and one in Israel. And every time they will take a realizator, a movie director, a photographer, a writer, and a comics book artist. So the outcome will be 4 different point of view on one reality. But we spent 10 days in this camp, so the kids will come to me, so he had some freedom to take pictures. But we did it both ways. Sometimes I wanted to draw quite fully, so I sent him with his camera to attract the crowd. That was a very interesting thing. And I think he sent the pictures afterwards. He did a big to the people he took. I asked the people I drew to write their names, so I could send the pictures as well. But they don't have internet, but there is one computer in the camp and somebody with a printer that can give it to them.
Any more questions for Nicolas? Well, I have a question that you have to ask every graphic novelist and graphic artist, which is, how do you feel about the word graphic novel? You know, the sort of respectability that comics have now.
Actually, in France, it's even more complex because the actual word is bande dessinée in French. It's a drawn strip, but bande dessinée, which means it's a very technical definition. It means it's a strip with images. After, graphic novel is really American. It was created to make a distinguo from comics, because there was lots of comics and then people start making adult novels or black and white stories. They needed a specific word on their own, so they created graphic novels. But in France, we say bande dessinée for everything. So nowadays we use roman graphic novel, because we steal the expression from the American. And it's a commercial thing, it's like, oh, roman graphic is very nice to... It's something to sell. It's another. It's a trade. But some like Tintin could be a graphic novel, because you know he's a reporter, he's traveling and meeting other culture. It's fiction, but it's very realistic, and it tells you a lot of things about other countries. So the distinguo is, it's not like a comics and graphic novel, 2 different things. Here, bande dessinée, roman graphic is one big pot with different little influences, and every writer goes one direction. But roman graphic was pretty big after Persepolis from Marjane Satrapi, which is almost set the size of the book, A5 format, a certain amount, more pages, black and white. There's some tips about the shape of the book that make it look like a graphic novel. Thank you.
And do we have any more questions?
We can perform a little dance, maybe. You want to dance?
I think you should dance, Nicolas.
No.
No?
It's too early.
Entertain? They'll go buy books? No.
No?
Maybe you can tell us about, do you read the graphic novels and non-fiction that comes out of India? Do you
Yeah.
keep track of it?
I don't track all of them every day, but
Right.
actually, yeah, I've met Amrita Patil already.
Right, yeah, she's fantastic.
Yeah, actually, I know her since I met her first time in 2002 in America.
Right.
So at that time, none of us did graphic novels. We just happened to study together in America. And after I met a PAO group.
I'm sorry?
PAO. PAO.
Oh, yeah,
Pau.
Pau
Okay.
Collective.
PAO
yeah.
Collective, sorry.
Yeah.
And yeah, like Sarnath Banerjee and Orjit.
Right.
And yeah, I keep following them on Facebook. Or
Right. Well, so shall we call it a day, Nicolas?
Yeah, let's go today.
Nicolas and I'll say goodbye.
Okay, goodbye. Thank you for coming, all of you.